Hello, and welcome to episode 22 of Scholarly Snippets. I am your host, Stephen Sorensen. This is my talk show where I interview people that have degrees in history or a field closely related to history. So today I'm joined by a guest who has a bachelor's in history and international relations. She's pursuing a master's in museum studies and a certificate in digital curation from Johns Hopkins. She worked as an archivist intern at a U.S. Army museum and just got hired as a museum specialist at White Sand Missile Range, New Mexico. Jen, how are you doing today?
Great, Steven. Thanks for asking.
That's good to hear. So, before we get into some of the stuff that you're currently doing, what originally got you interested in history?
So, the thing that got me in history was actually how much I thought history was boring in grade school. And I know that seems kind of uh, not what you would expect from someone with a history major and who works in museums, but my teachers tended to drone on and on during history classes, and you weren't allowed to have anything on your desk except for your book, and so I would just read the book from front to backwards, and I just go multiple times throughout a semester, and eventually I learned to like history. So
So, yeah, that's definitely an interesting take on it. It was so boring you couldn't help but get pulled into it.
yep.
So, yeah, you are clearly you're trying to work in the museums and you are currently working in a museum. You've interned in a museum. Before you did all of that, how'd you go about choosing a school to pursue these degrees from?
So when I was in high school, I was offered a 4-year scholarship through the Army Reserve Officer Training Corps program, and that was through Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. Um, And so I'm from Lima, Ohio, which is a little town about 90 minutes away from Columbus. And so it was only natural. If you are from Ohio, chances are you want to go to Ohio State eventually.
So, and then that's what you picked was Ohio State.
Yep.
So it was sort of a natural thing to go to Ohio State. You're from Ohio. A lot of people there want to go to that college. So, yeah,
Go
that makes
Bucks.
sense.
Yeah, yep.
Did you ever at any point change your major?
Yes. So I mentioned that I was awarded a 4-year scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
That was actually for biology with a pre-med track. Um, And that's when I found out that I did not like math and math did not like me. So ended up switching my major first to international relations. And then when I um, got that done, I still had a couple more semesters left until I graduated, because they don't let you graduate early for the scholarship. When they say 4-year scholarship option, it's a 4-year scholarship option. Um, and so I added history. And originally I was just going to take, like easy float classes, easy A's, and that uh, morphed into a history minor and then into a history major.
So, to summarize that, you originally had a scholarship for biology,
Yep,
and because math and you didn't have chemistry, it didn't end up working out, and you switched to history. Um,
yep. Chemistry, and I didn't have chemistry either. So
yep. So yeah, I could definitely see that. I personally don't care for biology. Like I think it's fascinating, but as far as going into pre med or trying to become a nurse or a doctor, I just don't have the stomach for seeing any blood or anything like that. Uh, I I get faint hearted for that kind of thing, but I get pumped up for history, so
yeah,
I'm getting
definitely.
into it. Um, so thanks for sharing about your major changes. What how many years do you think you've spent invested in historical academics, like going to college studying history?
So I'd say probably around 5 years total, with maybe 3 years total being like history in my undergraduate, and then another 1 year to 2 years with museum studies, with working in Army museums. And it says museum studies, but you're also conducting research. You're doing research on different time periods. Usually, you pick a time period and you specialize in that time period. In American history, if you were working at one of these Department of the Army museums.
Cool. So, did I hear like 5 years about?
Yeah, 5 years or so. Yeah.
So, in that 5 year period, I'm actually interested in well, what did you specialize in? Have you specialized yet?
So my specialization originally was World War One to World War One through World War Two, American military history. But ever since I moved down to New Mexico, it's been World War Two through the Cold War era. Since White Sands Missile Range is the home of the first atomic explosion, the Trinity test, which is actually celebrating its 75th anniversary tomorrow.
I thought that name sounded familiar,
Yep,
and that's what it is.
yep, yep. The
So,
Trinity test site.
so yeah, that's interesting. Um, so in that 5 year period, what have been your favorite parts of it?
My favorite parts were actually in my undergrad, I think, and um, I think that's just because personally, my personal um, my favorite era is or favorite topic subject is Western medieval Europe,
Hmm.
especially the Crusades, which I know isn't really in the West or in Europe, but it's a lot of Western medieval European events going on with the Crusades, and that's what I kind of focused on when I was in my undergrad.
So yeah, the some of your favorite parts were getting to focus on stuff that you're really fascinated in, which
Yes.
it's kind of I don't know if you feel this way at all, but I would imagine it'd be a little unfortunate having to work in museums that aren't about that kind of thing. But oh, what's your take on that?
I'm not too ed up about it, especially because I have a pretty sizable, in my opinion, library of books on the Crusades, on Western medieval Europe, on Western medieval European cartography. Those are kind of like the things that I really like to read about, and so I can do that on my own time. Um,
So you're sort of
but
getting the best of both worlds here, where
oh my
you get to
gosh,
pursue
definitely
your
yes.
passion and you also get to work in museums.
Yes, definitely. And I was in the army. Um, I did ROTC for 4 years, and then I did 3 years on active duty. And so the army is what I know, like as a person, as a career. That's what I know. And so I'm not feeling like I'm missing out on anything because I'm learning the history of the army.
Yeah, that's cool. So, on to the challenges. What have been the most challenging aspects of pursuing history degrees, and in your case, also museum studies?
I think that the hardest part for my undergrad was trying to juggle having two majors, going through ROTC, having two jobs as well at the same time, having to juggle all of that. And then after I got out of the Army, trying to get into graduate school. As you mentioned, Johns Hopkins it's at least an okay school. So the requirements to get in were a little bit hard, and I was actually a probationary student when I first started my first semester. If I had got less than a B minus in the class, then I'd be dropped from the program. But thankfully, I pulled through and got an A minus. So yay!
Yeah, it sounds like your plate was really full. Did I hear you say you had a double major and two jobs, and you were going through ROTC all at the same
Yep,
time?
yep. ROTC, then bachelor's in history, bachelor's in interrelations. I was a supervisor at the university library, Thompson Library, and I also worked in a calzone shop down there on the short north, which is like the street where the uh, the the bar scene is.
Yeah, that would be a very busy schedule, and I could see that being challenging having all those spinning plates going at once.
Definitely.
So yeah, what are some unique things that you learned or that you are currently learning while you're pursuing your master's in museum studies? Is it like some stuff that kind of sticks out that going into it you just didn't even have any clue that you'd be learning about?
So one of the most unique things is that I didn't understand about the museum studies field is how actually segmented the museum studies, the cultural heritage institutional field is. You have the conservatorship field where you're a registrar, you're a collections manager, you're taking care of artifacts. You're a curator, you're an exhibits technician where you're putting together and designing exhibits. You can be an archival technician or an archival specialist. You can be a digital preservation specialist. There's so many different things where you would need to know if you are in a small museum setting. Um, but it's really hard to, I guess, get a handle on all of these different things that are needed to actually run a museum.
Yeah, you are looking. Are you looking to become a curator? Is that what it is? Digital curation certificate.
So the digital curation certificate, yeah, it's a lot with managing digital assets, digital managing a museum's digital footprint, which can be in the form of, like YouTube videos, social media content, um, digitized materials. If you take your archives and you scan them into PDFs, into Photoshop documents, being able to manage all of that information, which can be hundreds to thousands of linear feet worth of information. And so it's a lot of juggling.
It's an important job though too, getting these collections digitized because the it's like the saying, hey, why don't you take a picture? It'll last longer. Um,
Definitely.
the
Yep.
it's an issue with some of these. They get lost. Fires happen, earthquakes, maybe to a lesser extent than it used to, but still, these natural disasters they destroy history. And getting it digitized, maybe we won't always have the internet, but for the foreseeable future, we will. And it not only allows people to look at this stuff from the comfort of their own homes, but people that who financially couldn't afford to, like I personally, I don't think I'd be able to afford a trip over to Italy to check out some of these collections in person, but I can get almost the next best thing here virtually checking it out. And so it sounds like you would be one of the people responsible for kind of putting some of that up and organizing it and allowing the public to indulge in museum collections.
That's definitely what I'm aiming for. You actually bring up an extremely important point. Um, in collections management, whenever you're going through our the basic collections management course, one of the first things that you learn is that nothing lasts forever at all, period. A curator's job, a conservator's job is to extend the lifespan of artifacts and archives for as long as possible, knowing full well that eventually, and that might be millennia from now, but it could also be in the case of the 1970s fire at the National Archives and Records Administration, could happen just as quick as that, destroying millions of records from NARA. But at least when you get them digitized, um, you can get them onto a format that's a lot easier to make mobile. Basically, you can keep transferring in this as different kinds of file types go extinct, such as I don't know if you remember the BMP uh, file type bitmap.
Um, no, I don't think I've
It's a
ever
really
used
old
that.
file. It's an old file type. So old that.
I'm 25 and I'm not super familiar with computer sciences, so
Mhm.
I think it might be a bit beyond me.
It's kind of like a JPEG or a PNG.
I know what those are.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's basically like the old versions of that,
All
but
right.
no one knows what a BMP is anymore because it's gone extinct, basically.
It's like a floppy disk to a CD
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
or a CD to a digital download
Yep,
because
yep, yep.
people don't even use CDs anymore.
No.
So yeah, what did we just talk about? Your museum studies. Yeah, that's interesting. There's definitely a lot that goes into curating museum. The segmented portion that you brought up is also, I think, worth mentioning again, just in the light of the wider field of history, where even history itself is quite segmented. When you're studying stuff, you usually specialize into even kind of what you're talking about. One area, you study World War I to World War II, and then you don't really explore much outside of that, at least for your own academic pursuits. But on your own, you might go and read about other times, but it's not your main specialization. So, what was it like working as an archivist intern for a U.S. Army Museum? What kind of responsibilities did you have there?
So I was the archival team lead at the Lewis Army Museum on Joint Base Lewis McChord. And basically, I just oversaw our volunteers who were generous enough to donate hours upon hours of time of their own individual time to get our archival collections digitized. And so a lot of what we did was using different types of digitization hardware. We had three or four types of scanners. We had a Kaiser photo suite, which is like this $1,000 photography suite, um, a large item photography studio, and we basically took all those and then we processed them according to the standard set forth by a standard called DACS. It's DACS, describing archives a content standard. That's the big name for it. And so we would basically take all of these old records from as far back as World War I, maybe even a little bit earlier, and get those digitized, processed, and then we'd have a top to bottom inventory list. And then we could send that inventory list out. And then if you asked us, hey, do you have any information on the founding of Fort Lewis in World War I, then we could go into go into our catalog and be able to see exactly what we have based on the information that we processed and digested out of the collection.
That is a lot that you had to do, and also really cool that you actually have experience digitizing manuscripts and getting them on the web. My personal interest is more in medieval and ancient studies, and
Okay.
so I explore a lot of the online collections there that have been digitized so far. And there's quite a lot that's been digitized, but even I sometimes forget that the same exact stuff has to happen for contemporary history, like what you were just talking about.
Yeah.
And yeah, there is quite a lot. Like, I'm curious, how long does it take usually? Say, I guess, how many manuscripts or papers do you get digitized a week, or does it vary, or?
So there's a lot of variance. There's a lot of different standards that go into processing a collection. Um, and then once you have whichever standards that you're going to use for that collection, you decide how in depth you want to process that collection. It can be at the collection level where you're just doing very quick overview of the contents, and then there's the item level, which you're going and you're describing letter dated July 17th, 1914 from Private Albert Blankley to family back home in Boise, Idaho. And then including a transcript top to bottom of this handwritten letter. And so that it adds up. But then you could also have just photographs, and all you're doing is you're inputting metadata for these photographs, and you're describing them, and that can go slightly quicker.
So yeah, all in all, it takes a bit of effort and knowledge on the topic to be able to get that done. So yeah, you have told us about some of your experiences in museum studies, some of your experiences as an archivist intern. You told me that you just got hired recently as a museum specialist, and I think we've kind of touched a bit on what you might be doing there, but what is it that you'll be doing in your current position?
So I'll be in charge of primarily collections management, policy and procedure development and implementation. And then I'll also be doing the exact same thing that I was doing in terms of archive work as well, getting the archives to an acceptable standard according to DAX and the Society of American Archivists. Um, kind of, for example, just today I've been doing an inventory for the past couple of days, and I actually just got done with sorting and uh, re-recording about 220 items. And they range from something as small as the world's tiniest rocket ever fired, which I thought was pretty neat. But then also
How
items.
tiny was it? Can you
It
tell us?
was
Was it like a
um,
stomp rocket?
first digit
Oh
of
wow,
my pinky.
yeah, that's pretty small. What would be the application for that?
I have no idea. I think it was just to be the world's smallest rocket.
Maybe there was some sort of threat for a Honey I Shrunk the Kids type mass scenario where we would then need smaller weapons to fight with.
Maybe, or it could have been something along the lines of like Ariel, uh oh, what's that? The spider movie where
Oh,
eight-legged freaks. I'm not
oh,
sure if you see.
I don't know if I've seen that. I was thinking Arachnophobia, where the spiders all come out the woodwork.
Oh yeah. Yeah, eight-legged freaks is it's like spiders get exposed to like a radioactive like dump, and they all grow. They're just like every kind of spider in the world just grows to like be 8 feet tall.
You said that's called Eight-Legged Freak.
I think it's called eight-legged freaks, yeah.
All right, I put it down in my notes. I've added it to my watch list. All right, so yeah, that's cool. Definitely, probably more likely to be a Guinness Book of World Records type scenario than a Honey I Shrunk the Kids or an Eight-Legged Freaks scenario. But yeah, you were talking about how you just finished with that. I don't know if you had anything else to add before I interrupted.
Oh no. But yeah, it goes from items that small to a 3 foot wide solid block of steel that was used as an impact, like a armor test,
Mm-hmm.
and it just had a hole right through the middle of it, and it's heavy. That's the point that I wanted to bring up. It was really heavy.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. And so you catalog and you get all that put into the database, is what you're saying, or?
So my museum is going through a bit of a transition. We are doing a 100% overhaul of our entire collection, top to bottom, not a single thing being missed. We just got done with our 100% inventory, and now we're going through and we are marking items for deaccession, and then we're also marking items, historical property that we have to be accessioned into our collections.
Cool. Do you're currently getting your master's degree? Do you
Yes.
have plans? I know this is something that probably maybe you're not thinking about because you're just focused on your master's, but do you have plans to pursue further degrees after that?
Um, I think I want to. I think I want to pursue a master's and maybe even a PhD in history.
Just pure history?
Um, yeah, with a focus. Yeah, with a focus. It'll depend on where I'm at or where I eventually settle down as like a career.
Mm-hmm.
Since I want to stay in the Army's museum system, I basically go wherever they need me. But when I find a permanent position, I'll probably select a um, like a master's field in history to specialize on.
What would be one of your top picks for that specialization?
I'm not too um, I'm not too fond of anything prior to the 20th century. The earliest I'll go back is probably the Spanish-American War, 1898, turn of the century kind of thing.
Cool. So we're just about wrapping up here, but before we end, I give everyone a chance on my show here to leave a message for people who are just starting to get interested in history. So that it could be like a kid or even like a grandpa or a really old person who is just decided, hey, I want to look more into museum studies and American military history. What's your message to those people who are they just sort of just got a spark for it?
I would definitely think that there's a lot of trepidation at pursuing something like a history major or an art major or like a museum studies major. But I definitely think that if you think that that's your calling, then the universe will the universe works in your favor to eventually find your destiny to wherever you will ultimately need to go. And so if it's what you think that you should do, then you should do it. And don't let anyone tell you different.
So basically, stick to what you love and don't give it up.
Yep, no matter what.
Great. Jen, thanks for joining me today. I had a pleasure talking with you and learning more about the background to the museums. I had fun and learning about the world's smallest rocket. I had no clue they were making rockets so small. So, again, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Stephen.
For everyone else who's watching, be sure to go and check out the Ctruth Patreon channel where I post additional content. I have another podcast series called Killing Time where I explore forgeries and hoaxes in history, and I also offer benefits such as limited time events that you can get in on if you're a patron, as well as limited or exclusive content and voting rights for the article of the month that I write every month. You can pick out what you want the topic to be, and so whoever gets whatever topic gets the most votes, that's what I write on. So check that out if you get the chance, and I will talk to you next week. Goodbye.